the whole point of consensus, right, is to agree upon who is the leader at a given moment, and everything after that, proving that the sequence of transactions is valid and so on. That's all rules of the chain, and we use a cryptographic technique to prove that. So every preceding block, a hash from that gets pushed into the hash of the next block. So they're linked together in an inextricable way. You can't fake it. So that's not what consensus is about. It's about the leader. Who gets to update that ledger? So picking a leader, proof of work, we do that with a puzzle system that we've described before. Proof of stake, people have staked, and that gives them voting rights. And based on an input, they can establish a voting cycle, which is deterministic and picks one of the leaders. But nobody, before that vote takes place, nobody is able to predict who that leader is going to be. But it will be one of the stakers, typically. Proof of authority is kind of like that, but you just have one staker. So it's always the same guy every time. So it's like hardwired into every node that if this guy signs the transactions, then that was right. If that guy signs the key block, then that was right. So, like, you've got the Senate, and then you've got Kim Jong Un, and that's it.
Well, I mean, you could have multiple authorized miners. You could
You could.
maybe do a round robin scheduling among the idea is basically that you have known actors that get to control the system.
That's the big
And
part is the known thing.
yeah. So in proof of stake, you trust that people who have something at stake, something to lose, are less likely to mess with the system. In proof of authority, you have identified trusted actors who get to produce blocks. And in proof of work, well, whoever puts in the work to solve the puzzles has earned the right to produce some content.
Just a question to this to add a little bit of flavor. We've all talked about the problems with proof of stake in previous videos, where it's anonymous. So draw a finer line, if you would please, between useful proof of stake, as we would all agree, which would be where you have known actors, or at least there's been a structure that is facilitating that, versus something that is a straightforward proof of authority. How would you define that balance?
Proof of authority doesn't necessarily lend itself to a natural penalty system because there's nothing at stake. You're just agreeing that we trust this guy. Proof of stake is putting something at stake, and that gives you the option of implementing punitive actions for bad behavior among the leaders. So, I said among the stakers. If we'd use this example before, where if you knock a guy, so you've got a node that becomes the leader, and then he gets knocked off the network, the chain's paused for that moment. There's not a proof of work thing where another one's going to come up with a puzzle and say, hey, I'm the leader now, and pick up and move on. You're paused until the next election cycle. That could be devastating to the chain. You could also be not being lazy and not mining, not including transactions, but you could be selectively choosing transactions you don't want to include. You could be performing a sensorial function. And if you're censoring a chain, and that's like a supply chain thing. So imagine an industry group that's trying to use an associate chain, not to trade money around, but to log a sequence of their production outputs, what they've produced, and then elsewhere in their industry, who has used what produced item to create a conglomerate item, for example. And they only have to log the item type and the serial of it, but you can put that on the chain in a very secure way, and you can't go back and make a new one. You can't go back in time and fake the number. You can't remove it. It'll always be there. It'll always be in that order, and you can't create fake parts later. Well, if you've got part of the supply chain system, let's say like that Honda uses, where they've got down a single street, there's all these little tiny factories that are run by different companies. And when they want to build a car, they initiate at that moment the generation of all the input parts to that car. And they literally like flow down the road and the car gets made. If, as a part, now there's a computer system they've made to make that smooth, to make that communication smooth. If, however, you have in this, let's say you've got 10 steps to make a car, at step number 3, something goes wrong. Step 4 won't happen. It's pending step 3, right? Now, if you are a staker inside of their blockchain-based supply chain security system, which is intended to prevent people from making fake parts like years later, if you wanted to screw that shop down the road, you wait, and every transaction signed by them that's trying to put a serial on the chain, you just don't mine it. Now that's blocking everybody downstream of them. Now, this is a very low faith kind of not nice move to make, but disputes do occur and people get sneaky. In a proof of stake system, they would be able to identify who wasn't including transactions. You can go back and check the log of all this, and you could penalize them by whatever the staking rules are. Now, to stake, they're going to have to take a significant number of Gajus, whatever that industry group has agreed is the correct amount of value to put in stake, to put at risk. And that is the penalty pool that they'd be drawing from. Like, we're penalizing you this much because you did this naughty thing, and we can totally prove that you did that. Does that make sense? So that's there's a penalty aspect to proof of stake. Well, in proof of authority, what you've got is the system that exists everywhere right now. The Federal Reserve could just make money up. Bank of England just make money up. Bank of whatever, they just make money up. And we're just trusting that they're not going to screw us. Like, fat chance, right? But we're just trusting that that's all true and that that's all good and they're not doing anything sneaky. When you use your Visa card, you're trusting that Visa's not going to just suddenly have canceled your thing because Trudeau got on the phone and you made a statement against the 10th booster or whatever, and now you can't use your Visa card and your bank shuts you out and you're locked out of the financial system because of an opinion. That is all proof of authority. And on a proof of authority chain, the same type stuff could happen. The reason it's important that they be known, a known actor, is that under the legal system of whatever jurisdiction they're operating in, you should have legal recourse to go after them for having screwed you outside of whatever the contract rules are. Does that make sense? So you're trying to penalize them, but you wind up penalizing them in the real world with the litigation system. Within blockchain, if you use a proof of stake system, you have a punitive recourse that has nothing to do with the legal system. It's all agreed within the rules of the blockchain ahead of time, which across jurisdictions can be much more powerful than legal recourse. For example, if your supply chain extends to China, they're notorious for breaking. That happened in my company. They'll break the last half of your contract, and not pay you. Okay, well, what do you do? This is where smart contracts become powerful, and that's where staking contracts also become powerful. Now, that's a function of the chain versus a business contract agreement, but it works out the same. You have a punitive recourse within the scope of the chain that's defined by programmatic rules, as opposed to praying that their legal system is going to attack one of their own state-owned companies, which they're not going to do. Does that make sense?
So one thing that if you're running your own associate chain, a lot of these consensus methods have bootstrapping problems. For example, proof of work makes you vulnerable in the beginning because you don't have that much mining power. Proof of stake, before you have valuable content on your chain and an appropriate stake distribution, this is also vulnerable. So one of the things we offer is that you can actually start, say, with a permission chain proof of authority, where you actually control all the content because, well, hey, you're building the chain, you're introducing it, so why not? And then when you start getting more usage, you can upgrade to a different consensus method. For example, proof of stake or proof of work, whitelisted proof of work, whatever. We support just about any type of consensus method there.